So picture this, you're walking down a street and you see an old, abandoned building. And in that building, there's just one single broken window. It seems like nothing, right? Small, insignificant, but what if that one little crack in the glass is actually the start of something much, much bigger? What if it's the first domino to fall, leading to neighborhood decay and even serious crime? That's the powerful and controversial idea we're going to unpack today.
Right, so how does that even happen? How can one tiny act of vandalism spiral into a major problem? This is the core question. And trust me, it's an idea that didn't just stay in a textbook. It completely changed how cities thought about policing, and we are still wrestling with the consequences of it decades later.
And here it is, the big idea itself, the broken windows theory. The logic goes like this. If a window gets broken and nobody bothers to fix it, it sends a powerful message. It says, no one cares here, no one's in charge. And pretty soon, other people get the same idea. That one broken window turns into many. And that feeling of chaos can spill out from the building and onto the street, signaling that, hey, maybe anything goes around here.
Okay, but where did this idea even come from? Well, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was championed by a real heavyweight, one of the most influential political scientists of the entire 20th century.
And that man was James Q. Wilson. I mean, this guy was an absolute giant in his field. He taught at places like Harvard and the University of Chicago. You know, the big leagues. He was so respected, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So when Wilson talked, people listened. And his ideas, they didn't just stay in the classroom. They hit the streets hard.
So for Wilson, the key thing to get is that the broken window isn't really about the glass. It's a symbol. It's like a giant flashing sign that says the unspoken rules of the community, the social fabric, it's starting to unravel. And when potential offenders see that sign, they think, hey, my chances of getting caught doing something here are pretty low. And that's when more serious problems can start to move in.
Now, an idea this big doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? Wilson's theory was actually a key piece of a much larger and, pretty controversial movement in the study of crime called right realism. You have to remember, this was the 1970s and 80s, a time when crime rates were a huge public concern. For a long time, the academic thinking was all about tackling the root causes, things like poverty and social inequality. But the right realists came along and basically said, look, that's all well and good, but we need solutions now. Let's stop philosophizing and start focusing on practical, real-world ways to control crime and punish criminals. So, what did they think caused crime? Well, they boiled it down to three main things. First, they talked about biology, the idea that some people are just born with traits like impulsivity that might predispose them to crime. Second, they looked at socialization, arguing that changes in the family structure meant people weren't learning self-control. But it was this third idea, rational choice, that would truly change everything.
And this was a total game changer. Rational choice theory says, hold on, what if criminals aren't just helpless victims of their circumstances? What if they're logical actors making a calculated decision? They're weighing the pros and cons, asking themselves, what can I get away with here, and what are the odds I'll get caught? If the reward looks good and the risk seems low, well, then committing a crime becomes a rational choice. And that simple idea became the blueprint for a whole new style of policing.
Okay, so you've got this academic theory about costs and benefits. How in the world does that translate to what a cop actually does on their beat? Well, this is where things get really interesting, and where policing starts to look very, very different.
Even before broken windows, Wilson was already thinking about this stuff. He looked at two main policing styles. You had the watchman style, which was all about keeping the peace, using your judgment to just handle situations. And then you had the legalistic style, super strict, by-the-book law enforcement. Wilson's big insight was that focusing only on the letter of the law missed the bigger picture. He believed that simply maintaining a sense of order, that watchman style, was the most important job a cop had.
And boom, there it is. You take the broken windows theory, you mix it with rational choice theory, and what do you get? You get a brand new and very aggressive strategy, zero-tolerance policing. The logic was simple. If crime is a rational choice, then you have to raise the cost of that choice. How do you do it? You sweat the small stuff.
So what does that actually look like on the street? It means police cracking down hard on all those broken windows, the graffiti, the begging, jumping the subway turnstile. The most famous example, of course, was New York City in the 1990s. The idea was that by making the whole environment feel orderly and controlled, you'd scare off more serious criminals. This thinking also fueled policies like 3 strikes, which brought down the hammer on repeat offenders.
But here's something that's really easy to forget. As huge as the broken windows theory was, it was just one slice of James Q. Wilson's work. The guy's intellectual curiosity was incredibly broad and went way beyond crime and punishment.
I mean, he was writing about everything from urban politics and government bureaucracy to our moral character and culture.
In fact, a lot of experts would tell you his most significant book was one called Bureaucracy. But let's be real, it's the legacy of broken windows that still sparks the most intense debates today.
And that legacy is, well, it's complicated. The theory absolutely changed policing, no doubt about it. But it also raised some really difficult questions about whether it works and whether it's fair. Questions we are still grappling with.
This is the big one, the million-dollar question. Did it actually work? Supporters will point right to the massive crime drop in New York City and say, case closed. But critics are quick to fire back, hang on a second, crime was already trending down all across the country, even in cities that didn't use zero tolerance. So, was the policy the magic bullet, or was it just a coincidence?
Then there's the whole issue of displacement. Did these tough tactics actually solve the crime problem, or did they just move it somewhere else? I mean, if you crack down super hard in one neighborhood, do criminals just pack up and relocate to a place with fewer cops? The jury is still very much out on that one.
And this might be the most powerful criticism of all. Is it fair? When you give police broad power to crack down on low-level disorder, who gets targeted? Critics argue that these policies disproportionately affect minority communities, the homeless, and young people, which can completely erode the trust between the police and the public they're supposed to be serving.
Which brings us to our final thought, and it really gets to the heart of the entire debate. The broken windows theory offers a path to creating order, but it forces us to ask a really tough question. What are we willing to sacrifice to get that order? And, maybe most importantly, who is the one that ultimately pays the price? It's a question that started with a single broken window, and it's one we are still wrestling with today.